Good afternoon, fellow Toastmasters. My Turkish friends, Nasılsın dostlarım? So the title of my speech today is, does nuclear power have a future in America? And my argument is that, yes, it does. Although the efficiency of renewable energy such as solar cells I think will eventually take over nuclear power. But having said that, the goal of my speech today is not to give a physics presentation on the working scientific principles behind nuclear power. It's just to educate you on the pros, the cons, and then make my case for why it does have a future in America. So how I'm going to do that is, first off, I'm going to talk about why should you care. A lot of people, they just flip on the light and the light bulb comes on, they don't really care if it's from nuclear power or from wind or solar, natural gas. It doesn't really matter, but it should matter, and it should matter to us because it's an important part of our economy and could be potentially dangerous. Then specifically I'm going to get into the cons and the pros of nuclear power, and then based on weighing the benefits and disadvantages of those, I'm going to make a case for why specifically nuclear power is here to stay for at least the next 20 years. So first off, why should you care? I gave the example a minute ago of you flip on the switch, it comes on, why does it really matter? Well, if you don't really care about environmental factors or safety, that's fine. But I think everybody here does care about their wallet, and everybody cares about how much they have to pay for their power. And that could change depending on whether you have nuclear power or coal or petroleum, natural gas. It's very important for us to choose one that will be economically smart so that we don't have to pay too much just to cook something on the grill or take a shower with the lights on. The other thing is environmental factors. So global warming is obviously something that's pretty big and pretty important to all of us. It's real and it's induced by humans. That's my take. You can argue with all the scientists out there. Everybody, for the most part in the scientific community, agrees that global warming is real. So we have to do something about it. So the way to do that is to use power sources that don't contribute to carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And the last part is safety. Obviously nobody wants Fukushima or Chernobyl again. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of that. And I bring that up because in April 1986, this reactor back here, Chernobyl, exploded, and it forced a 1,000 square mile evacuation area, and over 200 villages in Belarus and Ukraine had to be evacuated. So try and imagine if somebody came into your house today and said, hey, you have to evacuate and never come back. That could be part of the potential consequences of choosing the wrong power source, or the right power source. That's me at Chernobyl. So that's my transition. I didn't leave the slide there long enough. You can see that this is the sarcophagus. That could be a whole other speech, the visit to Chernobyl, but obviously the consequences I saw firsthand there. So that's my transition into the cons of nuclear power, the first part being safety. I think that's something that everybody thinks about first. They hear nuclear power, they think, not in my backyard. I don't want that here. I don't want an explosion. I don't want my kids to have 3 legs. Whatever your excuse is for not wanting nuclear power. The other part is the potential terrorist attack. Some nuclear reactors, the plutonium inside those reactors as part of the waste products could be used for a nuclear weapon. That's obviously not something that we would want terrorists to be able to use our own nuclear power sources to create some kind of nuclear weapon. The other thing is high capital costs. A typical reactor to power a city of 500,000 people like Sacramento costs roughly $5 billion, as to where a coal power plant costs about $1 billion. So you're looking at about 5 times as much the upfront price. Obviously that's something we have to think about when you have to pay for that. The other thing is the long construction time. A nuclear power plant could take 2 to 3 years to build, and then on top of that you have to get a license to operate the nuclear power plant. Coal power plant could take about roughly a year. So obviously you have to wait a lot longer for the 3-year plant versus the 1-year plant. So having said those things, why do people want to use nuclear power? What are the pros? I just showed you a picture of Chernobyl, and I just talked to you about how expensive things are. Why would we want to use nuclear power? And I'll start off in the corner there. There's a professor, his name's Dr. Richard Muller. He comes to NPS all the time. I'm not sure if any of you have gone to any of his talks, but he's a huge proponent for nuclear power. And he makes the case that, and Tom knows this pretty well, the U.S. Navy has been using nuclear power for submarines and aircraft carriers for about 60-some years now, early 1950s. He makes the case that if they can do it without an accident for that long because of their good standards of safety, obviously it's something that can be used effectively for the civilian populace. So also, I talked about earlier, global warming is something that is very real and something that we do need to address. And nuclear power can address that because it doesn't provide any CO2 emissions. In the background, Some of you see this and you're like, Dom, there's radioactive steam there, or there's got to be some kind of CO2 emissions. But really all that is steam coming from the cooling process of the nuclear reactor cycle. So there's nothing radioactive or carbon monoxide producing about that. And the other thing is the lower operating costs. So nuclear power is actually the cheapest once you have it built and running. It's the cheapest power source at about 2 cents per kilowatt hour, which is kind of scientific, but it's the cheapest because once you build it, it's pretty self-sufficient. I mean, it's on submarines. Obviously, they're not bringing a lot of stuff down under the water there to keep it going. You only have to refuel it once every 1 or 2 years, which means that it's cheap to maintain. So having said all these things, what is the future of nuclear power? Is it something that we just get rid of, or is it something that we should try and keep around, or do we have a choice? Likely there's a, hold on, I think I missed the slide here. Oh, there we go. So one other thing I do want to address is the large generating capacity of nuclear power. And that's, if you remember nothing else about this talk, my corny slides with Chernobyl are talking about this guy that maybe you don't even care about him. The thing that you really need to think about is, imagine a city that's 500,000 people, like Milwaukee where I'm from, or I gave the example of Sacramento. To power that city, you only need one nuclear power plant. If you wanted to produce the same amount of power with solar panels, this is the visual I want to give you for how much solar panels you would need. So imagine a football field is 160 feet wide. So it's 100 yards long, but instead of just going 100 yards, you have to go 85 miles to produce the same amount of power that a nuclear power plant produces. That's why we use it. Yeah, we have to accept the risks of potential accident, but it's so extremely powerful in such a small area that it's something that we would want to use and utilize so that we don't have to have 85 miles worth of solar panels to power a city. So that's my segue into the future. Nobody wants to take the risk of having nuclear power, but in the long run, it is the bridge to renewable energy because that's something that we will use in the future and there's no CO2 emissions. Thank you.